Welnati Kameye. That means I see you, and I have now seen all three Avatar movies in IMAX 3D. What is up, everybody? Random Man here, bringing you my review for Avatar Fire and Ash in one take. But first, let me take these IMAX 3D glasses off. I'm not going to do this whole video while wearing them. So, the plot of this epic science fiction film follows Jake and Neytiri and their family as they deal with grief and encounter a new aggressive Na'vi tribe, the Ash people, led by the fiery Varang, as a new moral focus also emerges on Pandora. Going into this movie, I was highly anticipating it. This is one of my most anticipated movies of 2025, as I am a big fan of the Avatar films by the one and only James Cameron. Now, back in 2009, we got the first Avatar film, and I went over this with my previous review for the previous film in this series, Avatar: The Way of Water, but I'll quickly recap here. The first Avatar film I saw just after the new year of 2010 began, and I saw it in IMAX 3D, and it remains one of the top 10 movie-going experiences I've ever had. I was 12 years old, so clearly I was easily impressed with what I saw, but really getting taken to another world, getting transported to a world like Pandora was really truly one of a kind. And then I literally waited an entire lifetime to see 2022's Avatar: The Way of Water. I was 25 when that came out. So again, I was 12 when the first film came out, and then I was 25 when the second film came out 3 years ago. And I would loop that in to be one of my favorite movie-going experiences of all time too, because of how we went back to Pandora, the whole angle with the water tribe there, a bunch of other stuff going in between. And then now, 3 years later, we get Avatar Fire and Ash. And I was really looking forward to seeing how the story would continue, as I am one of the people that, like I've said, was in love with the franchise from the beginning and was suckered into these story and characters despite them debatably being derivative of a lot of other stuff that we've seen before. But again, it's the whole immersion factor of just being on Pandora that really got me sucked in. And now seeing what has been offered next, I was just really looking forward to seeing, and also seeing if this is going to continue to be one of the biggest film franchises ever. The first Avatar film is the highest grossing film of all time worldwide, and The Way of Water was also one of the top 5 highest grossing films of all time worldwide. So James Cameron holds the record for 3 of the 4 highest grossing films of all time, one of the other ones also being Titanic. But without further ado, starting out with the cast and their performances. We have Sam Worthington returning as Jake Sully from the previous 2 films, and I think this is probably his best film role to date. Now, with him and most of the other cast members, they have to do their performances in motion capture because, of course, most of this movie is driven visually by a bunch of the effects and all other CGI that is in here. But with his character having such a big arc in the first film and continuing it on with the previous film and now with the third film in Fire and Ash, I think that he is someone that, has quite a moral center to him in being focused on family, but also trying to get away from the conflict of the militarized humans that have been on him the whole time and he broke away from by the end of the first movie. And this also applies with Zoe Saldana as Neytiri. Now, Oscar winner Zoe Saldana. If you recall, she won Best Supporting Actress for Amelia Perez earlier this year. And I always thought that she was one of the real standout performers of this entire franchise because her performance is entirely motion capture. She wasn't a human at first who became an avatar like Jake Sully did, but with her character, I mean, just with a lot of emotion, just being so loyal to her people, being one with the Na'vi and everything. And then here she has a lot more to do than what she did in the previous film, The Way of Water, especially because of what conflict has emerged with her character in relation to her family in general, and all their threats coming back more or less, just with what we have seen too. For example, the Colonel, played by Stephen Lang, coming back After, spoilers if you haven't seen the previous two films, he was killed in the first film, and then in the previous film, he was reanimated into an Avatar Na'vi body and is still remaining a threat and returning once again here. I mean, he's basically like, the generic tough guy, bad guy, if you would. But I think that he does his part well, and then other people coming back here. The leader of the Water Tribe, played by Cliff Curtis, his pregnant wife, played by Kate Winslet. And then we have some of the kids of Jake and Neytiri. We have Loak, played by Britton Dalton, who's also the narrator of the film. He has a lot to prove, or he wants to prove, in this film after the tragedy at the end of the previous film struck. We have Kiri, who is the adopted daughter to Jake and Sully, or not Jake and Sully, I mean Jake, Sully, and Neytiri. This is what I get for doing this in one take. She is played by Sigourney Weaver. She's technically the character of Grace from the first film, reanimated, and is the daughter to that character, just put with the memories in with her. She has a lot of focus as well here too, because of how spiritual she is. She's this very spiritual character, and having her be involved again, I mean, I think that was an excuse to get Sigourney Weaver and Stephen Lang back into these movies and putting them into Avatar bodies. But I really think that they do well with the parts here. And then we have Jack Champion as Spider, the human who hangs out with Jake and Neytiri's family all the time and is the biological son to the Colonel. And a huge thing emerges with him that has a lot of the conflicts go into play, on top of it being connected to the previous film. So with the performances here, I think they all are really well done, and I would even argue that this is the best that I've seen in any of the three Avatar movies in terms of the acting. And I know I'm missing a very big major player here, but I'll get to her in a little bit when getting into more of the plot, which I'll get into now. With the writing of this film, James Cameron was one of the co-writers of this film, on top of being a producer and the director, of course. And apparently this film was technically The Way of Water Part 2, in that we begin with the aftermath of the previous film. Again, spoilers if you haven't seen the previous two films, but one of Jake and Neytiri's sons was killed by the end of the first film, and we get a whole reorientation there, and we see how the rest of the family is doing. And then, of course, the militarized humans are still on the hunt for Jake and everyone else. But then, amidst all that, even before we get to see the Colonel try to come back and get Jake, we see the Ash people, led by Varang, come into play, and she is played by Una Chaplin, the granddaughter of Charlie Chaplin, and she's the big new player here. And I was utterly amazed by her performance, because she is such a threat, and also with her alluring presence here, the imagery that is brought on with her character just being so sultry and like, ugh, you don't want to mess with her. And then she later gets involved with the Colonel in sort of kind of relationship where they are allies, because of course they want to go after Jake and just like want to stay top dog, or like the big top alpha Na'vi or whatever of Pandora. But we see, yeah, they're a new threat here, while Jake and his family are still with the Water Tribe. And a lot of what is connected here, as I mentioned, this is technically part 2 of The Way of Water, and you see the extension of that in how a bunch of the characters from the previous film do come back, and there's a lot more to say and do with it. And one thing that the films in this series have been called out on is just being recycled, or borrowing a lot of plot points from other famous narratives, or just being like the typical, if you want to go as far as to say, white savior type story, or as the first film was described as Pocahontas 3000 or Dances with Wolves in Space. But honestly, I'm a bit biased because I have been into these movies since I was 12. I think the conflicts or the narratives in these movies are a lot better than those movies that I previously mentioned, because it's not just the world of Pandora that we're in here. I think the whole family angle, once they got more involved with being about family, with the previous film, helped create a lot more activity and just a lot more involvement with what's going on with the story here. And of course, the bad guys are still being pesky as ever and trying to go after our main heroes and everything like that. So it keeps on going. And then also just in seeing how we're further getting into Pandora, because Pandora is huge. I already thought it was huge with the first film, but then we got into the water tribe the last time around. Now we get into the fire/ash tribe here, and they show off that, the Na'vi come in all different forms here. And a lot of people say that this is like a metaphor or allegory or parallel to Native Americans here, and that they're trying to kill each other, which, if you know your history throughout the Americas, different Native American tribes before the colonizers came in were out to get each other and anything like that, but that's a whole different can of worms to open up later if I want to. But anyway, with all that, yeah, you see all that here. And then the main moral compass of the movie too is that Jack Champion's character of Spider, the human living with the Na'vi, is suddenly then able to breathe without a breathing mask or apparatus, and is able to be one with the Na'vi. And of course, that is sought after by the villains here, on top of our main characters being sought after by the villains, just to have them all dead and further trying to take over Pandora and everything, to harvest their materials, minerals, even going after the whale characters from the previous film, because of course they are seen as valuable, with hundreds of billions of dollars being on the line here. Yes, again, the plots here are basically recycled from other famous narratives, and it's no different here in what we're seeing with the narrative here, just being the same as before, but now we're further expanding on what is being done. I think that all of it tied together by the directing of James Cameron really holds it together, even if we're seeing familiar beats and we're seeing where everything is going. The first hour, I thought, got me back into the world of Pandora so effectively. The middle hour, I would say, did slow down a bit because we're getting into like what is happening with the climax in the third act. But then the final hour of this movie is just all around action, and it feels like Return of the King style action, where that it's so epic, like how these movies have always been in scale, and just going in here and being another astonishing adventure on Pandora. And this gets me into the whole directing and visuals, vision, or whatever for this movie. I mean, James Cameron does direct the crap out of this movie, and it's an understatement to say that the visual effects here are among the best I've ever seen in any movie. Even though it's only been 3 years since the last one, it continues to impress me, and having seen it in IMAX 3D, like I have with the previous two films, that is the way to see this movie. See it in 3D at least, and on the biggest screen possible. One thing I have to mention is that the movie is partially done, at least from what I noticed, in a higher frame rate, at least with the action, because early on, there's a flying sequence where I noticed that the movie was moving at a faster rate of motion than usual. Then it would slow down with like dialogue or talking sequences in between action, and I was thinking, like, was this on purpose for my screening, or was this just the decision for all other screenings for these movies? Because from what I recall, the last time I saw a 3D movie in the theater was Avatar: The Way of Water 3 years ago, and I didn't notice a high frame rate there. But here with the action, I thought it worked because the action was so engaging in the first place, how it's all staged, choreographed, with it mostly being VFX. I mean, that's not an easy task to do when you're working with all of that, everything being rendered in a computer. So if you notice that here, I want to know what people think about the high frame rate with this film, if it was being forced into other screenings from what I noticed, or it was just integrated to all-around 3D presentations of this film. I thought it was great. It worked. It felt like I was watching a video game play out, and, me being a gamer, of course, I'm used to playing games with, optimal frame rates of like 60 frames per second. Movies are, if you don't know, usually presented in 24 frames per second. And with a higher frame rate, it's more or less going around 48 frames per second, or just oscillating back and forth with that. And that's what I noticed with the action. And there's a lot here to really bask in the glory of. A lot of machine guns coming and blowing everything up, bombs, explosions. The action in the water from the previous film comes back here, and then a lot of aerial battles with all of the other creatures that are being, flown on, and everything else, I think, with how it is all such a big, huge spectacle. It is incredible to view. It's incredible to view, especially when you go by the end here. I can't see how anyone is not suckered in by the visual prowess of this movie alone, especially when it's essential to see this thing in 3D, like with the previous films. Having been done in 3D, James Cameron really understands the format and technology more than most other filmmakers, because I can't say there are too many other movies that I have seen that use the technology this well. And then other technical elements here. the cinematography, just gorgeously done in seeing that, again, everything was mostly rendered on a computer, but wow, it felt like everything was real, as if I could reach in and touch it, no less with the 3D glasses on. And then the original score here, Miley Cyrus did the song that was played during the end credits here. She got a Golden Globe nomination for the film just earlier this month, and the film is also nominated for Cinematic and Box Office Achievement at the Golden Globes. Such a stupid category. Ugh. And it was nominated before it even got a general release today on opening day, December 19th, but it was also gone by projected box office results or whatever. I know this movie's gonna make a crap ton of money, but in any sense, it's like, okay, there we go. But again, with how it all comes together, yeah, I would say that the 3 hours and 15 minutes or so just flew by because I was so into it in the first place. And I'm one of those people that was just into the narrative because of the characters that I personally got into seeing since I first saw Avatar about a decade and a half ago. And now, with us seeing this all come into play, again, I felt like the climax or the final act of this movie felt like a Return of the King style kind of execution here, because James Cameron, though he said he plans to do 2 more of these movies in 2029 and 2031 respectively, from what I've read, I felt like, for whatever reason, if this movie is not as successful as the previous 2 films, this would be a good way to end off this trilogy, because there are things left open to see what could happen next. But in what is resolved here, and all other conflict points being addressed and pointed out, I think that you could see this as a franchise capper. You could see this as a trilogy ender if you would like to be. But I think with us now looking like we're going to receive these movies every few years now just to keep the hype going, if people are still into these films. I mean, it made a bunch of money in Thursday night previews alone, and this movie is easily going to clear $1 billion, I think. Will it clear $2 billion like the previous 2 films did? We'll have to see. But you really cannot get much more big budget spectacle that delivers than the Avatar movies, at least from what I feel. If you were not into these movies in the first place at all, whether it be the story or just not, you're not into these weird 9-foot tall blue aliens for 3+ hours or so, I mean, there's not much that's going to sway you this time around with this. But if you're like myself, who likes action, adventure, just science fiction, a scale of epicness, if that's even a word to be put in here, you know, you're going to at least enjoy Avatar Fire and Ash. Is this my favorite of the franchise? For all that I have been saying and praising this movie endlessly, because again, I am a bit biased in that I have loved these Avatar movies up until this point, I would say this is my least favorite of the movies for now. I'm going back and forth and saying if the first or second is my favorite. I have not seen these movies multiple times in theaters or anything like that. You clearly see I own the Blu-rays for them, but you know, I would have to really go back and double check. But if you're going to go out to the movies during this winter holiday season, and it's going to be something like Avatar Fire and Ash to really deliver on everything you could ask for in a movie. I mean, no matter if you are seeing plot points come back that have been done before or have been done in other types of media outside of this, I mean, you really cannot ask for much more than this. And if you're going to see this movie at all, you have to see it as it was meant to be seen on the big screen and in 3D at least. So there's really not that much more to say with Avatar Fire and Ash, because it's really a similar experience that has been delivered with the previous 2 films. And again, if you have been into that in the first place, like I have, then this is something that I highly recommend seeing. I loved Avatar Fire and Ash like I did with the previous films, and, you know, not that much is going to change my mind here, because they just go on experiences that really make me be taken into another world, and isn't that what cinema, however you want to define it, is all about? My dad loved this film too. I saw it with him like I saw it with the previous 2 films, and, you know, it's just something that can wow anyone of any age just to really go back and be immersed from. With all of that being said, my final verdict for Avatar Fire and Ash is 4.5 out of 5 stars. Thank you all, as always, for watching. Be sure to like this video, comment on what you thought of Avatar Fire and Ash. Social media links in the description. Subscribe to my channel for more, and I'll catch you on the next movie review.